A white police officer stops a young man's car, assaulting and humiliating him because of his appearance and skin color, but he doesn't know who the young man really is. In San Cristobal, a small town in the heart of the country, lived Kevin, a 24-year-old who, despite his young age, had already reached a high rank in the army. The city was known for its quiet streets and friendly locals, but like everywhere, there were its shadows. Kevin, the only son of a military family, had always been a dedicated and disciplined young man. His father, a renowned army officer, and his mother, a retired military nurse, had taught him from an early age the value of humility and integrity. Kevin, even with his elevated position, never let himself be carried away by pride. He lived simply, driving a modest car and dressing discreetly, which reflected his modest character and his belief in living simply. One day, while driving through the city in his car, Kevin was surprised by an unexpected approach. He was standing at a traffic light when a police officer named Patrick approached. Patrick was known for his arrogant and prejudiced temperament, something he made a point of demonstrating whenever possible. "Hey, you!" Patrick said, with an authoritative tone. "Whose car is this? It feels really good for someone like you to be driving." Kevin, keeping his usual calm, replied politely, "The car is mine, sir. I'm just coming home." Patrick, however, wasn't interested in Kevin's response. He looked disdainfully at the young man and, without recognizing who he was, decided to humiliate him. "Someone like you, with these cheap clothes and this looks, shouldn't be behind the wheel, not even in a simple car like that," Patrick said, in a sarcastic tone. "I bet you don't even know how you got this car. Who knows, it might even be stolen." Kevin took a deep breath, knowing that staying calm was crucial. "I assure you, sir, that the car is mine and acquired legally." But Patrick was not satisfied. He began making derogatory comments, mocking Kevin's simple outfits and insinuating that someone of his color and appearance couldn't have something, even modest. "Do you really think anyone is going to believe that a kid like you, with this face and these clothes, can have a car of his own?" Patrick said, as his eyes sparkled with arrogance. Kevin, maintaining his composure, allowed the officer to continue with his humiliating attitude. The young man knew that any untimely reaction could make the situation worse. What Patrick didn't know was that Kevin's cell phone, discreetly positioned on the dashboard of the car, was recording the entire event. Every word, every insult, was being captured. "Come on, get out of the car. I want to check that out here." "Let's see what we find," Patrick said, clearly looking for something to incriminate Kevin. The young man got out of the car without complaining, knowing that patience would be his greatest ally at that moment. "You can check, sir," Kevin said, in a calm tone, despite the discomfort of the situation. Patrick began to search the car abruptly, but soon realized that he would not find anything suspicious. His frustration began to grow, and he decided to take that anger out on Kevin. "Do you think you can fool me with that humble pose of yours?" Patrick said, approaching Kevin with a cruel look. Without warning, the officer struck a strong blow to Kevin's stomach, causing him to double in pain. "This is for you to learn not to cross my path," Patrick said, with a sadistic smile. Kevin, surprised by the aggression, tried to compose himself, but before he could say anything, Patrick gave him another blow, this time in the face. The impact caused Kevin to fall to the ground, his lip bleeding. "Do you think it's over?" Patrick said, laughing as he kicked Kevin in the ribs. "You're nothing, you know. Nothing." Kevin writhed in pain, but despite the humiliation and suffering, he forced himself to remain calm. Patrick finally stopped, satisfied with the cruel fun he had taken from Kevin. He crouched down, holding Kevin's face tightly, and whispered contemptuously, "Remember that the next time you think about leaving the house with that car, you don't belong here." After having one last laugh, Patrick stood up and ordered Kevin back to the car. "Go away before I change my mind and decide to do worse." Kevin, still feeling the pains of the blows, slowly got up and got into the car, without saying a word. He knew that there would be no point in reacting there. With effort, he started the engine and went on his way, while Patrick watched him with a triumphant gaze. As he drove, Kevin felt the metallic taste of blood in his mouth and the sharp pain in his ribs. The anger and frustration were there, but he knew that acting impulsively was not the solution. He had in his hands overwhelming proof of the racist, degrading and violent treatment he had received. He knew that the truth was on his side and that he needed to act in the right way. In the days following the incident, Kevin reflected on what had happened. The physical pain of the blows he had received from Patrick was still a constant reminder of humiliation, but what bothered him most was the injustice. He knew he couldn't let it go, but before taking any action, he decided to talk to his father, a renowned army officer, who had always been his inspiration and advisor. That afternoon, Kevin donned his full military uniform, which proudly displayed his hard-earned insignia. He knew that the next step would require not only courage but also his father's support and wisdom. As he left home, he took his car and drove towards the military reserve where his father worked. Upon arriving at the reservation gate, Kevin got out of the car and introduced himself to the soldier who was on guard. "Good afternoon, soldier," Kevin said, holding out his documents. "I'm Officer Kevin Jones, and I'd like to speak with Colonel Jones, my father." The soldier looked at the documents, checked Kevin's rank, and nodded. "Yes, sir." "You are allowed to enter," said the soldier, returning the documents and opening the gate. Kevin entered the reserve, drove calmly to the building where his father worked, and parked the car. When he got out of the vehicle, the young man took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. He walked with firm steps towards his father's office. Upon entering the office, he was greeted by a secretary who, recognizing him, directed him directly to Colonel Jones's office. When Kevin opened the door, he found his father sitting behind a desk covered in papers. The colonel looked up and, when he saw his son with bruises on his face, he maintained the calm and serenity typical of an experienced military man. "I see that the training at the preparatory school was difficult," said the colonel with a faint smile, making a joke to ease the tension. Kevin, however, couldn't help but smile before sitting down in front of his father. "I wish it had been just that, Dad," Kevin said, beginning to explain what had happened. He told about Patrick's approach, the insults, the blows he received and how he recorded everything on his cell phone. As Kevin narrated the details, his father's smile faded, giving way to a serious and worried expression. When Kevin finished telling everything, Colonel Jones remained silent for a few moments, taking in the gravity of the situation. Then, he looked directly into his son's eyes and spoke in a firm tone. "You did well to come talk to me, Kevin. Situations like this cannot be ignored, and the fact that you have kept calm and recorded what happened shows that you are already a man of great wisdom." Kevin nodded, relieved to have his father's support. "What should I do now, Dad?" he asked, seeking guidance. The colonel thought for a moment before answering. "With your authority in the evidence you have, you should go directly to the source, talk to the superior of this policeman. But before you do that, I suggest you stop by and talk to your mother." Kevin frowned, a little surprised by the suggestion. "Talk to Mom? What happened about?" he asked. The colonel shook his head. "No, don't tell her the truth. I don't want your mother to worry. Tell her that these bruises are from military training and ask her to take care of your wounds. After that, you'll be ready to face this situation." Kevin, even though he understood his father's concern, knew that it would not be easy to hide the truth from his mother. But seeing the determined expression on the colonel's face, he knew this was the best approach. "It's okay, Dad. I will do that. I'm going to see the mother and then I'll go straight to the police station." The colonel nodded, standing up to give his son a hug. "Remember, Kevin, you have every reason on your side. Don't let injustice win. But always be prudent and follow the protocols." Kevin said goodbye to his father with a firm hug, feeling strengthened by his words. He knew the next step would be crucial, but now he was more determined than ever to seek justice. After leaving his father's office, Kevin headed to his parents' house, where his mother was. On the way, he reflected on the conversation he had just had. His father's support and practical advice gave him the confidence he needed to face the situation. However, he also knew that hiding the truth from his mother would be challenging, especially considering the affection and attention she always devoted to him. When Kevin arrived at his parents' house, he was greeted by the familiar aroma of homemade food, something that always calmed him. When he entered the room, he saw his mother, who immediately noticed the bruises on his face. "Kevin. What happened to you?" she said, her voice full of concern, running to examine him closely. Kevin forced a smile and tried to keep the tone casual, as suggested by his father. "Don't worry, Mom. It was just a minor incident during a military training. Nothing serious," he said, trying to reassure her. But as he feared, his mother didn't seem entirely convinced. "A training? And you couldn't protect yourself, my son?" she asked, frowning as she examined the bruises more closely. He nodded, trying to keep the lie going. "It was an intense simulation, Mom. But I'm fine, really. I just thought you could help me with these bruises, like you always did," Kevin said, trying to divert the conversation to the care he needed, rather than discussing the details of what had actually occurred. His mother, still suspicious, sighed and went to get the first aid box. As she applied ointments and bandages to her son's bruises, she kept a worried look. "You know you don't have to hide anything from me, Kevin," she said softly, as she worked. "If anything else happened, you can tell me." Kevin felt a twinge of guilt, but remembered his father's request. "I know, Mom. But this time, it's really just what I said." "I'll be fine," he replied, trying to sound convincing. His mother just nodded, resigned, but did not stop taking care of him with all the attention and affection. After a few minutes of treatment, Kevin's bruises were covered and he felt a little more prepared, both physically and mentally, for the next step. "Thank you, Mom. You always know what to do," he said, standing up. "I have some things to take care of now, but I'll be back later." His mother watched him as he got up and headed for the door. "Be careful, Kevin. And please don't hurt yourself anymore," she said, with a worried smile. Kevin nodded and said goodbye with a tight hug. With his body relieved of the pain and his mind more focused, Kevin left home, determined to follow his father's advice and face the situation head-on. He got in the car and drove directly to the police station where Patrick worked. Now more than ever, he was prepared to seek justice, using the authority he possessed and the evidence he had gathered. Upon arriving at the police station, Kevin parked the car and took a deep breath. Dressed in his impeccable military uniform and carrying with him the determination of someone who would not accept less than what was fair, he walked to the main entrance. As soon as he entered, he felt the policeman's gazes on him. He was an imposing figure, and his presence did not go unnoticed. Kevin went straight to the service desk and asked to speak to Patrick's superior. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak urgently with the commander of this police station." The attendant, impressed by Kevin's posture and rank, immediately made the call to the commander. While waiting, Kevin mentally prepared himself for the conversation that was to come. She knew that this would be the opportunity to show what had happened and ensure that Patrick faced the consequences of his actions. A few minutes later, the commander of the police station, a middle-aged man with a firm posture and experienced look, appeared at the front desk. Upon seeing Kevin, his face lit up with an expression of respect. "Good afternoon, officer. I am Commander Gutierrez. How can I help you?" he said, holding out his hand to Kevin. Kevin shook the commander's hand firmly and replied, "Good afternoon, Commander. I would like to talk privately about a serious matter involving one of your officers." Gutierrez immediately noticed the seriousness in Kevin's tone and nodded. "Sure, please follow me to my office," he said, leading Kevin down a hallway to a reserved room. As soon as they were seated, Commander Gutierrez gestured for Kevin to start talking. "I'm at your disposal, officer." "What is it about?" Kevin took a deep breath and began to relate the events. "A few days ago, I was approached by one of his officers, Agent Patrick. What should have been a routine approach turned into an episode of racism, abuse of power and physical aggression. I was insulted, humiliated and, without any reason, attacked by this policeman." As he spoke, Kevin maintained a calm but firm tone, making clear the weight of the situation. Commander Gutierrez frowned, visibly worried. "These are very serious charges, Officer Kevin. Do you have proof of what you're saying?" "Yes, Commander, I do," Kevin replied, pulling out his cell phone. "I recorded the whole incident on my cell phone. Every word, every blow, is recorded here." He began to play the audio of the recording, allowing the commander to hear everything. As the audio played, Commander Gutierrez's face hardened. It was evident that he was shocked and disappointed by his subordinate's behavior. When the recording ended, he was silent for a few moments, taking in what he had just heard. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he said finally with a stern tone. "This type of behavior will not be tolerated in our police force." Kevin watched the commander's reaction carefully. He wanted to ensure that the matter was treated with the seriousness it deserved. "I agree, Commander. That's why I'm here. I can't let this kind of abuse go unpunished." The commander stood up and, with a determined expression, made a quick call to his subordinates. "I want you to bring Agent Patrick to my office immediately," he ordered, his voice charged with authority. Kevin remained seated, feeling that justice was beginning to take shape. A few minutes later, the door to the room opened and Patrick entered, initially without recognizing Kevin. He maintained the same arrogant posture, until his eyes met Kevin's, and the recognition finally came. The color faded from his face, and the confidence he had displayed before turned into pure fear. "Commander, why was I called?" Patrick asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You have been called to account for your actions, Agent Patrick," Commander Gutierrez said coldly. "This officer presented evidence that you assaulted him and treated him in a racist and abusive manner. You will be arrested right now and face trial for what you did." Patrick began to stammer, trying to explain himself. "But, Commander, I didn't know who he was. I didn't think that." His attempt at defense was quickly stopped by the commander. "It doesn't matter, Agent. What matters is that you have failed to do your duty with respect and dignity, and that cannot be ignored." Kevin watched as two other police officers entered the room and began handcuffing Patrick. "This is a mistake. You can't do this to me," Patrick shouted, but his words fell on deaf ears. Kevin felt a sense of justice being served, but he knew that this was only part of the process. As Patrick was led out of the room, Commander Gutierrez turned to Kevin. "I want to assure you that this situation will be treated with all seriousness. He will face the consequences of his actions," said the commander, with a firmness that made it clear that he was committed to correcting the mistake. "Thank you, Commander," Kevin said, feeling relieved, but also aware that there was still a way to go to fully get over it. "I trust that justice will be done." With that, Kevin said goodbye to the commander, knowing that he had taken an important step in the search for justice, and left the police station with his head held high, determined to move forward, never allowing fear or prejudice to stop him from fighting for what was right. A few days after Patrick's arrest, Kevin received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, a military officer explained that Patrick's trial was scheduled to take place soon. As it is a case involving both the police and the army, the trial would be carried out internally, following military protocols. The officer asked Kevin to take all the evidence he had and to choose some witnesses who could bolster his testimony. Kevin thanked him for the information and hung up the phone, knowing that the next step would be crucial. He needed witnesses who could credibly and authoritatively support his account. The decision of who to take to trial was immediate. He knew that his father, a high-ranking military man and a respected figure, would be essential. In addition, Commander Gutierrez, who had shown firmness and disappointment in discovering Patrick's actions, would also be a powerful witness. Kevin decided to talk to his father first. He went back to the office inside the military reserve, where he knew he would meet Colonel Jones. Upon arrival, he was greeted with the usual formality by the soldiers guarding the place. After identifying himself and showing his documents, he was allowed to enter and went straight to his father's office. As he entered, Colonel Jones looked up from the papers he was reviewing and saw Kevin approaching with a serious expression. "Kevin, what's wrong? Any news?" he asked, always straight to the point. Kevin sat across from his father and explained the situation. "Dad, I received a call informing me that Patrick's trial will be held in a few days. It will be an internal military trial, and I need witnesses who can support me. I thought of you, not as my father, but as a high-ranking officer who can talk about what happened and about Patrick's character." Colonel Jones nodded, understanding the importance of Kevin's request. "You did well to seek me out," he said firmly. "I will be there, but as a military man, not as his father. This is a serious matter and needs to be treated with all the impartiality that the situation requires." Kevin knew he could count on his father's presence and support, and that reassured him. "Thank you, Dad. His presence means a lot to me, especially in this context." After securing his father's presence as a witness, Kevin knew that the next conversation would be with Commander Gutierrez. He went to the police station where he had first confronted Patrick. Upon arriving, he was immediately ushered into the commander's office, who greeted him with the same serious expression as before. "Officer Kevin, how can I help you this time?" Gutierrez asked, straight to the point. Kevin explained the situation and his request. "Commander, I have received word that Patrick's trial will be soon, and it will be an internal military trial. I will need witnesses to bolster my testimony, and I thought you, as someone who worked with him and knows his behavior, could be essential to this case." Gutierrez folded his arms and nodded, showing understanding. Patrick was a good cop in many ways, but his attitudes and prejudices were never tolerable. "I will be there to make sure the truth is told," bluntly. The commander's firmness made Kevin more confident that justice would be served. "Thank you, Commander. His presence will be fundamental." With the witnesses confirmed, Kevin felt he was prepared for trial. He knew it would not be easy, but now he had the support of two respected men whose words would carry great weight in the military court. In the days that followed, Kevin mentally prepared for the trial, reviewing the evidence he had and reflecting on how he would present his case. He knew that the truth was on his side, but he also knew that the battle would be tough, especially within a system as strict as the military. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. Kevin, his father, and Commander Gutierrez headed to the designated location, a military tribunal set up inside the base. As he entered the room, Kevin felt the weight of the moment. He was ready to fight for justice, knowing that he had by his side figures who symbolized honor and truth. The military court was filled with high-ranking officers, all there to watch the trial unfold. The atmosphere was serious and solemn, as was to be expected in a procedure of such gravity. Kevin entered the room alongside his father, Colonel Jones, and Commander Gutierrez. He knew that what was at stake was not only his own sense of justice, but also the integrity of the institutions that everyone there represented. As he took his place at the front of the courtroom, Kevin maintained his poise, while the officers organized themselves and the military judge, a respected general, took his place. "We are gathered here to try the case of Officer Patrick, accused of abuse of power, racism and physical assault against Officer Kevin Jones," the judge announced, his voice echoing through the room. "Let the judgment begin." Patrick was brought into the room in handcuffs, with an expression that mixed fear and despair. He knew that the situation was serious, and that the evidence was against him. The silence in the room was almost palpable as the judge asked Kevin to present his testimony. Kevin stood up, with his father and Commander Gutierrez by his side, and began to narrate the events of that fateful day. He recounted in detail how he was approached by Patrick, the degrading treatment he received, the racist insults and, finally, the physical assaults he suffered. I knew I couldn't react impulsively, so I kept my cool and recorded everything, Kevin said, as he handed over the phone with the recording to the court. The recording was played in the room, and the silence was replaced by murmurs of shock and disapproval among the officers present. Patrick's cruel words, his arrogant tone and the sounds of aggression filled the room, making it clear to everyone the seriousness of the acts committed. When the recording ended, the judge turned to Kevin. "Officer Kevin, do you have any witnesses you would like to call to support your testimony?" The judge asked, his voice grave. "Yes, sir," Kevin replied. "I would like to call Colonel Jones, my father, and Commander Gutierrez, who worked directly with the accused." Colonel Jones was the first to stand. He walked to the center of the room, where the judge greeted him with a respectful nod. "Colonel, what can you tell us about your son's character and how he handled this situation?" asked the judge. The colonel looked directly at the judge and answered firmly. "My son, Kevin, has always demonstrated exemplary conduct, both in his personal and professional life. He was educated to act with honor, integrity, and respect, values that he carried with him throughout this incident. The fact that he kept calm and sought the right avenues to seek justice shows that he acted with the wisdom of a true officer." The colonel paused before continuing, with a more serious tone. "However, I am here as a military man, not as a father. And as a military man, I can say that Officer Patrick's behavior is unacceptable and needs to be punished according to the rules and regulations that we all follow." The colonel's testimony made a strong impression on the courtroom. His authority and impartiality were evident, and this further strengthened Kevin's case. Then, Commander Gutierrez was called to testify. The commander, who had worked directly with Patrick, went into detail about the officer's behavior. Patrick was always a competent police officer in many ways, but his prejudice and arrogance were characteristics that could not be ignored. There were other minor incidents which, although not as serious as this one, showed a pattern of behavior which finally culminated in this deplorable act against Officer Kevin. Commander Gutierrez's testimony served to paint a complete picture of Patrick's character, making it clear that the incident with Kevin was not an isolated act, but part of a recurring behavior. When the witnesses finished testifying, the judge asked for a brief pause to deliberate. Kevin felt the weight of the moment, but he knew he had done everything in his power. He looked at his father and the commander, who gave him waves of support. Now, everything depended on the court's decision. After a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity, the judge returned. The room was absolutely silent as he took his place and began to speak. After considering all the evidence and testimony presented, this court concludes that Officer Patrick is guilty of charges of abuse of power, racism and physical assault. As a result, he will be relieved of his duties in the police and will serve time in military prison, in addition to paying a significant fine to Officer Kevin Jones as reparation for the damage caused. Kevin felt an immense relief when he heard the referee's words. Justice had been done. Patrick was taken out of the room, now no longer as an arrogant cop, but as a man who would have to face the consequences of his actions. When the trial ended, Kevin left the room alongside his father and Commander Gutierrez, feeling that he had finally gotten justice. Kevin's story in San Cristobal has become a powerful example of how, even in the face of prejudice and abuse of power, truth and integrity can prevail. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.